triumphs over evil, they almost always have to kill me off very creatively. In the film Fled, I was shot to death by Lawrence Fishburne. If I wasn't dead enough, I was run over by a motorcycle by his partner. If you saw The Mask of Zorro, you know I had my head cut off and stuffed in a jar. And in the Hulk, well, let's just say I made that green guy very angry. But the beauty of what we do in the movies is that it's make-believe. We have a script to follow and a director to gauge the action and even the violence and to yell, "Cut!" when it's over. But to the victims and survivors of domestic violence, family violence, it's not make-believe. That violence, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, or psychological, that violence, it's real, it's scarring, and sometimes it's deadly. So you're probably asking yourself, what's this movie bad guy doing here talking to you today about this issue, domestic violence and teen dating violence? Well, the reason I speak is because of what happened to some individuals that I know. I speak out because of a woman I know. This woman had come from another country with her husband and 2 young sons, like so many other immigrant families, to pursue a better way of life here in America, only to find herself and her children terrorized by the oppression of domestic violence and child abuse that took place on a level of torture in their home. For 15 years, after giving birth to 3 more children and carrying the burden of cooking, cleaning, childcare, and a full-time job at a factory, this woman also endured the physical, psychological, and spiritual wounding at the hands of her husband, until one day, when she set off on foot to the local laundromat, pulling her family's many loads of laundry behind her with a cart. Well, that woman didn't return home that day. On the way there, she collapsed in the street and was rushed to a hospital where doctors determined that she was so close to death, they told her she was in God's hands. Now, this woman survived her collapse, but when she returned to that house, the domestic violence only increased. I also speak out because of a boy I know. This boy went into his city's police department, and he took off all his clothes in front of a room full of police officers. And as the boy stood there naked, the officers were horrified that this boy's body was covered in bruises, welts, and burns. The boy told the police, "My father's doing this to me, to my siblings, and to my mom." And he said, "Now please, go to my house and arrest him and get him out of there for good." The police said that what they could do was have the boy sign a formal complaint that would put him in the car, drive him back to the house to talk to the father. The boy said, "You don't seem to understand. If I do that and you don't arrest him, he's going to kill me when you leave." The police said there was nothing more that they could do, that it was a private family matter. Well, the year was 1967, and that boy was me. And that woman who collapsed in the street, that was my mother. That nightmare was life for me, for my siblings, and for my mom. Now, to the outside world, we appeared no different than any other immigrant family trying to make it in this country. My father appeared absolutely normal. He had a great command of English from his schooling in Cuba. He was friendly, he was handsome, he was a real charming guy. But inside our house, behind closed doors, lived a much different person. I don't remember my father ever hugging or kissing my mother. My mother was forbidden to hug or kiss her sons because it might turn us into sissies, according to my father. But what I do remember is him beating her. Not only in rage, but cold, methodical planning, not only with his hands and his feet, but with words and weapons too. And pregnancies didn't stop him. As a child, I was beaten, I was tied up, I was locked in closets, I was hammered, I was burned, just to name a few of the things he did. Now, this is not about a man who had a hard time controlling his temper, you see, because my dad took great care not to hit us on the face or parts of our body that were not covered up by clothing. People ask this question, and some of our experts will tell you this, that they say, why doesn't the woman just leave? Why didn't my mom get herself and her kids the hell out of there? Well, I'll tell you why, because see, my mom didn't speak English. And she came from a country and a culture where women stayed with their men no matter what. And you have to remember, this is over 40 years ago where we had very little public awareness about domestic violence, family violence, or any programs or shelters or hotlines that my mom could have called. The main reason why my mom never left was because she feared for our lives. So instead of my mother leaving my father, he abandoned her while she was pregnant and then kidnapped the rest of her children, taking us from Los Angeles, California, all the way to Miami, Florida. Now, of all the indignities that my mother had to endure at the hands of my father, having her children taken from her is still one of the scars that haunts her to this day. So it took my mom many months to figure out where we were in Miami, to have my baby sister Carmen, and then to move to Miami herself, where she was granted a divorce. But because my dad earned more money at the time, he retained custody of all the children living with him. So without my mother in the household, and even though I was absolutely terrified of my father, that led to the first and only physical confrontation with my father that I started. I exposed him for the coward that he was. Here was a man who had wielded absolute power over his defenseless wife and small children, now cowering and crying beneath me. And all I ever wanted from my father was for him to love me. But at that instant, I knew the truth that I think many victims of domestic violence, family violence, finally realize. And that is that love should never hurt. No matter how bitterly a man cries or a boyfriend cries as he beats a woman and says, I'm only doing it because I love you so much, or that he's brutally punishing his children to make them better because he loves them so much, that's not love. And that's not love either. So that night, at 15, I ran away from home and from my father's terror for good. And after living on the streets for a few days, a high school classmate of mine spotted me and told me everyone was looking for me, the school, the cops, my father. Well, I told him what had been happening to me at home, and he insisted that I go home and tell my story to his father. Now, in my life, I've had many angels and advocates that have helped to guide me out of my darkness. My friend's father was one of those angels, and he also happened to be a lawyer. So I was able to take my father to court, where I was granted a restraining order, meaning he couldn't get near me. That was one of the last times I saw my father, who died when I was in my 20s. I'm also grateful that there were other angels in my community. For the last 2.5 years of high school, I was taken in like the unofficial foster child by several families within that school. And you want to talk about that village or a little diversity, okay, there was the Jewish family that owned a Chinese restaurant. There was an Italian family with 9 kids, I made 10. There were 2 Cuban families and the Southern Baptist family. For all the years that I've been given the message that I was unworthy and deserving of being hurt, I was now being given a different message by people who cared, my coaches, my teachers, my friends, the administration, and those families that took me in. And that message was that I was a good human being, worthy of being loved and of loving in return. So as a result of these positive forces, I was able to turn my life around dramatically. I went from being a violent member of a street gang in my sophomore year to president of the senior class. I led in 4 sports. I was captain of the football team. I went on to receive a 4-year football scholarship at Florida State University, where I made the dean's list and was a team captain. I played under Coach Bobby Bowden. After graduating from Florida State with a degree in criminology, God knows why I'm an actor, I was a free agent draft pick and the first Cuban American to be given a tryout with the Miami Dolphins. Now, I should clarify, this didn't put me on that active team roster, but it allowed me to play in 2 preseasons with the team that I idolized growing up in Miami. It was really a dream come true. After that, I went on to become an actor, and today I've been happily married to Mim Eichler Rivas for over 20 years. And you know, I'm really proud of my roles as an actor, as an author, as an activist, but my most important role is that of father to Eli, who, by the way, not only has he started Teens Against Domestic Violence here at MiraCosta, but Eli's been speaking out with me since he was 5 years old. He's lobbied members of Congress with me. And as a matter of fact, when Eli was 5.5, we'd been invited to the Oval Office to meet with President Bill Clinton. And of all the things that 5.5-year-old Eli could have asked President Clinton for, I don't know, a national PlayStation Day, Xbox Day, something like that, he looked up at President Clinton and he said, you need to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act that was being held up in Congress. So I'm really proud of his accomplishments, but also I just wanted to give you the message that you can make a difference. A lot of times, you know, you say, you know, how can we make a difference? And I just want to finish by telling you that, especially the guys in this room, you know, all too often, you know, there'll be a situation where we read about, like on a sports page, the fact that I'm a former athlete, where we read about the athletes that are getting arrested for some form of violence, whether domestic violence or sexual assault. And I see that same athlete return after a slap on the wrist to a hero's welcome. Well, not only is that an injustice to the society, but it's also an injustice to those other 48 guys in the team who are good men and good fathers and husbands, and they give their free time to charitable causes. But here's the problem. Those other 48 guys aren't standing up. So if there's a new solution to an old problem for all the guys in this room, is that we need to start standing up and speaking out on this issue. So I thank you. God bless you, and peace.
Violence is everywhere, even at Costa. One of the most common types of abuse is found in teen dating.